The restaurant was filled with warm golden light and quiet laughter. Crystal glasses clinked. Expensive suits leaned over polished tables. No one noticed the door slowly opening behind them, until the cold wind entered first. A small barefoot girl stepped inside. Her dress was thin. Her feet were dirty from the street. She looked like she didn't belong anywhere near a place like this. People stared. Some whispered. The manager rushed forward to remove her before she embarrassed the restaurant. But the girl ignored everyone. Her eyes were locked on one man sitting alone at the center table. A man everyone in the city feared. Adrian Volkov, the most powerful Mafia boss in Ravenna. She walked straight up to him, her small voice barely louder than a whisper. "Sir, can you give me a home?" The entire restaurant froze. Because what Adrian Volkov did next, no one in that room would ever forget. The restaurant glowed with warm amber light. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen drops of gold, casting soft reflections across the polished marble floor. The quiet clinking of glasses mixed with the gentle notes of a piano drifting from the corner of the room. Expensive perfume floated through the air, blending with the rich smell of roasted meat and fresh bread. It was the kind of place where nothing unexpected ever happened. Until the door opened. A cold gust slipped inside. The girl stepped through it. She couldn't have been older than 8. Her dress was thin and wrinkled, the color faded by dust and rain. Strands of dark hair clung to her cheeks, tangled by the wind outside. But the first thing people noticed wasn't the dress. It was her feet. Bare, small and pale against the gleaming marble floor. The music continued for a moment longer. Then conversations slowly began to fade. One table after another fell silent as heads turned. A man near the bar frowned. "Whose child is that?" A couple by the window exchanged uneasy glances. The restaurant manager spotted her almost instantly. His polite smile vanished as he hurried across the floor, already rehearsing the calm, professional voice he would use to escort her out before she disturbed the guests any further. But the girl wasn't looking at him. Her eyes were fixed on someone else. A man sitting alone at the center table. Adrian Volkov. Even in a city filled with powerful people, his name carried weight. Criminals feared him. Businessmen negotiated carefully around him. Politicians pretended he didn't exist. Tonight he sat quietly in a dark suit, eating his dinner in silence. The fork in his hand paused as he sensed movement nearby. Then he looked up and saw the girl walking straight toward him. The manager quickened his pace. "Excuse me, sweetheart," he said gently, stepping into her path. "You can't be in here." But she slipped past him. Not running, just continuing forward. The entire restaurant watched. By the time the manager caught up again, the girl had already reached Adrian Volkov's table. She stopped beside him. For a moment, no one spoke. Adrian studied her carefully. Up close, the signs of the street were impossible to miss. The dirt on her feet, the faint bruises on her knees, the way her small hands clenched nervously at her sides. Yet her eyes held something unexpected. Not fear, not defiance, something steadier. The manager hurried up beside her, his voice tight with panic. "Mr. Volkov, I'm terribly sorry. I'll remove her imd." Adrian raised one finger. The gesture was small, but it carried absolute authority. The manager froze mid-sentence. The girl looked up at Adrian. Her voice was quiet. "Sir," she swallowed nervously. "Can you give me a home?" The words seemed to echo across the room. At a nearby table, a woman covered her mouth. Someone whispered, "Did she just?" Even the piano stopped playing. Adrian didn't answer right away. His fork slowly lowered onto the plate. He leaned back slightly in his chair, studying the girl like she had just placed an unusual question in front of him. "Why me?" he asked calmly. The girl shifted on her feet. "You look like the most powerful person here." A ripple of whispers moved through the restaurant. The manager looked like he might faint. Adrian's expression remained still, but something flickered briefly behind his eyes. Most people used different words to describe him. Dangerous, ruthless, untouchable, but not powerful. He leaned forward slightly. "And what makes you think powerful people give homes to strangers?" The girl shrugged softly. "I didn't know who else to ask." The honesty in her voice disarmed the entire room. The manager tried again. "Mr. Volkov, please allow me to handle." Adrian lifted his hand once more. Silence returned instantly. Then he pushed his chair back and stood. Several guests instinctively leaned away. Adrian Volkov had a presence that created space around him. He walked around the table and stopped in front of the girl. Then slowly, he lowered himself onto one knee so they were eye level. Gasps whispered across the restaurant. Now that he was closer, Adrian noticed details others might miss. The way her shoulders trembled slightly from the cold. The faint scratch across her cheek. The stubborn determination in her eyes. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Sophia." Her voice was barely louder than a breath. Adrian nodded once. "How long have you been outside, Sophia?" She hesitated. "A few weeks." A murmur spread through the room again. Adrian glanced toward the manager. "Bring her a chair." The manager blinked. "Sorry." "A chair," Adrian repeated calmly. The man rushed away immediately. Adrian looked back at Sophia. "When was the last time you ate?" Her eyes drifted toward the food on the table. "I don't remember." Something tightened briefly in Adrian's chest. The manager returned quickly with a chair. Adrian pulled it out himself and placed it beside the table. "You can sit." Sophia climbed carefully into the chair, her feet dangling above the floor. Adrian turned to the manager again. "Bring her food." "Yes, Mr. Volkov." "And shoes." The manager nodded quickly. "And something warm." Within moments, waiters were rushing across the restaurant. A small bowl of hot soup appeared, fresh bread, a pair of soft shoes, and a folded blanket. Sophia stared at the food like it might disappear if she blinked. Adrian gently slid the bowl closer to her. "You should eat." She picked up the spoon slowly. The first taste seemed to warm her from the inside. Her shoulders relaxed slightly as she took another bite. Around the room, guests watched in stunned silence. No one had ever seen Adrian Volkov behave like this. The feared man of the city sitting quietly across from a barefoot child, making sure she had dinner. After a few moments, Sophia looked up again. "Thank you." Adrian studied her carefully. "Why did you come here tonight?" She held the spoon in both hands. "My mom said powerful people can change things." Adrian's eyes sharpened slightly. "Did she?" Sophia nodded. "She told me if something bad ever happened, I should find someone strong." The restaurant felt even quieter now. Adrian leaned back slowly in his chair. Across the table, Sophia wrapped the blanket around her shoulders. "Warm, fed, safe." But something in her words lingered in Adrian's mind. Something about the way she said them. Like this wasn't just a child asking for help. Like there was a story behind it. And Adrian Volkov had just stepped into the beginning of it. Night had settled fully over Ravenna by the time Adrian Volkov's black sedan moved through the city streets. Rain had begun to fall, soft at first, then steady, turning the glowing streetlights into long reflections across the wet asphalt. The city looked different at night, quieter, more careful. And yet in Ravenna, everyone knew the same unspoken truth. There were two systems that controlled the city: the law and Adrian Volkov. Inside the sedan, the world felt silent and insulated. The windows were dark, the engine smooth and almost soundless as the car moved through traffic. Sophia sat quietly in the back seat. She had never been inside a car like this before. The leather seats were soft, and the warm air coming from the vents made her fingers tingle as feeling slowly returned to them. The blanket Adrian had given her was wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Her new shoes rested neatly on her feet. Across from her, Adrian sat calmly, his posture relaxed but alert. The faint glow from passing streetlights slid across his face in brief flashes. He hadn't spoken for several minutes. Sophia wasn't sure if she should say anything. Finally, curiosity won. "Is this your car?" Adrian glanced at her. "Yes." She looked around the interior again, impressed. "It's very big." A faint trace of amusement touched Adrian's eyes, though it never quite reached his expression. Across from him sat Victor, his most trusted advisor. The older man had silver hair and sharp, thoughtful eyes that rarely missed anything. He had been silent since they left the restaurant. But now he leaned slightly toward Adrian. "You know the city will talk about this," Victor said quietly. Adrian didn't answer immediately. Outside the window, neon signs blurred into streaks of color. "They already do," Adrian said calmly. Victor studied Sophia for a moment. She sat quietly, listening but pretending not to. "She could be a problem," Victor continued. Adrian's gaze remained on the rain outside. "She's a child. That doesn't mean she isn't connected to something dangerous." Adrian didn't respond. But the silence between the two men carried the weight of long experience. Victor had spent years watching problems appear from the smallest beginnings. Across the seat, Sophia spoke again. "Are you a king?" Both men looked at her. Adrian raised an eyebrow slightly. "A king?" She nodded. "My mom said powerful men sometimes run cities." Victor almost smiled. Adrian leaned back slightly. "I'm not a king." Sophia thought about that. "But people listen to you." Adrian didn't deny it. The sedan turned onto a wide avenue lined with tall buildings. Most of the city's offices were dark now, but the skyline still glowed under the rain. Sophia pressed her face gently against the window. "So many lights," she whispered. Adrian watched her quietly. For a moment, something in the scene felt strangely familiar. A memory. A much younger version of himself, sitting in the back seat of a car many years ago. Another small figure beside him. His sister. The thought arrived suddenly and without warning. Adrian's jaw tightened slightly. He looked away from the window. Victor noticed. "You're thinking about her again," he said softly. Adrian didn't answer. Sophia turned back from the window. "Thinking about who?" Neither man spoke immediately. Finally, Adrian said quietly, "Someone I should have protected." Sophia didn't ask more. Children sometimes understood when silence meant something important. The sedan slowed as it approached a large iron gate. Two security guards stepped forward, their coats dark with rain. The gates opened automatically. Beyond them stood Adrian's residence. It wasn't a house. It was closer to a fortress. Tall stone walls surrounded a wide courtyard. The building itself rose 3 stories high, its windows glowing warmly against the dark sky. Sophia's eyes widened. "Do you live here?" "Yes." The car rolled slowly into the courtyard. Several security men stood under the entrance awning, straightening as the vehicle approached. The driver stopped the car. One of the guards quickly opened Adrian's door. Rain tapped steadily against the roof. Adrian stepped out first. Then he walked around the car and opened Sophia's door himself. She climbed out carefully, clutching the blanket around her shoulders. For a moment, she simply stared at the building. "It's bigger than the bus station," she said softly. Victor stepped out beside them. "That's not a high standard." Sophia looked up at Adrian. "Am I staying here?" Adrian studied her quietly. That had been the question waiting since the moment she walked into the restaurant. Inside the house meant safety, but it also meant responsibility. And Adrian Volkov had spent years avoiding responsibilities that felt personal. Victor watched him carefully. He knew that expression. It meant Adrian was weighing something deeper than simple logistics. Finally, Adrian spoke. "Tonight," he said calmly. Sophia nodded slowly. The front doors opened as they approached. Warm light spilled across the stone steps. Inside, the house was quiet and elegant, the polished wood floors reflecting the soft glow of chandeliers. Sophia stepped inside slowly. Her shoes made small, careful sounds on the floor. She looked around like someone entering another world. Adrian watched her, and for the first time since she appeared in the restaurant, a quiet thought formed in his mind. This girl had walked into his life by accident. But accidents rarely happened in his world. Which meant one thing. Somewhere in Ravenna, someone would soon realize that Sophia Reyes was no longer alone. And when they did, they would come looking for her. Morning in Adrian Volkov's residence arrived quietly. The rain had stopped during the night, leaving the city outside washed clean and glistening under a pale gray sky. Thin beams of sunlight slipped through the tall windows of the mansion, stretching across polished wooden floors and expensive carpets. Inside, the house remained calm. Almost too calm. For Sophia Reyes, the silence felt strange. She woke slowly in a soft bed that felt far too big for her small body. The blankets were thick and warm, and for a few seconds she simply lay still, confused about where she was. Then she remembered. The restaurant. The soup. The shoes. The powerful man who had knelt in front of her and asked her name. Adrian Volkov. Sophia sat up slowly. The room around her was beautiful. Tall curtains framed the wide window beside the bed, and a chandelier hung gently above her. The furniture was polished and elegant, nothing like the places she had slept before. For weeks she had woken to cold floors and noisy streets. This felt different. Safe. Carefully, she slipped out of bed and walked toward the window. Outside, the courtyard stretched wide and quiet. 2 security guards stood near the gate, their dark suits sharp against the morning light. Even from this distance, Sophia could tell something about them. They weren't just guards. They were watching everything. Meanwhile, downstairs in the house, Adrian Volkov was already awake. He stood inside his office, looking over several documents spread across a long wooden desk. Morning light touched the edges of the papers while the rest of the room remained shadowed. Across from him sat Victor. The older man held a cup of coffee, but hadn't taken a sip in several minutes. "You brought a homeless child into the house," Victor said calmly. Adrian didn't look up from the papers. "Yes. And you don't see any complications with that." Adrian closed the folder in front of him. "There are always complications." Victor leaned back slightly in his chair. "That girl didn't just wander into your life by coincidence." Adrian finally looked up. "You think she's a threat?" "I think she could be connected to one." Adrian remained silent for a moment. Victor continued. "You heard what she said last night. Her mother worked for Salazar Logistics. The name hung quietly in the air. Victor Salazar, one of the city's most respected businessmen, and one of its most carefully hidden criminals. Adrian walked slowly toward the window of his office. Outside, the courtyard guards shifted positions. Salazar runs half the port operations in Ravenna, Victor said. Shipping, imports, cargo routes. And things that never appear on official records, Adrian added quietly. Victor nodded once. Exactly. Adrian folded his arms. So you believe the girl's mother saw something? It's possible. And now the girl might know something as well. Or someone might think she does. The silence that followed was heavy with meaning. In Adrian Volkov's world, information was power. And sometimes people were eliminated simply because they might know too much. Adrian turned back toward the desk. For now, he said calmly, she's just a child who needed a place to sleep. Victor studied him carefully. You don't usually take personal interest in situations like this. Adrian didn't answer immediately. Instead, he opened another folder on the desk. Inside were financial reports and shipping manifests. Salazar Logistics appeared several times. Years ago, Adrian said quietly, I failed to protect someone. Victor's expression softened slightly. He knew who Adrian meant. Adrian's younger sister. She had disappeared when they were both teenagers. The system had failed her, and Adrian had never forgiven himself for it. Victor set the coffee cup down. This isn't the same situation. Adrian looked up again. No. Then his voice became quieter. But it feels similar. Upstairs, Sophia had left her room. The hallway stretched wide and silent in both directions. Paintings hung along the walls, each framed in gold. She walked slowly, unsure if she was allowed to explore. Her footsteps echoed softly across the wooden floor. Eventually, she reached the top of the staircase. From there, she could see the large entrance hall below. 2 house staff members were arranging flowers near the front door. They paused when they noticed her. One of them smiled gently. Good morning. Sophia hesitated. Good morning. The woman nodded toward the stairs. Mr. Volkov is in his office. Sophia wasn't sure if she should go there. But curiosity pulled her forward. She walked carefully down the staircase. Meanwhile, inside the office, Adrian closed the last folder. If Salazar is connected to this, Victor said, we should start looking into it immediately. Adrian nodded slowly. We will. A soft knock sounded on the office door. Both men looked up. The door opened slightly. Sophia stood in the doorway. She looked small against the large wooden frame. For a moment, she simply stared at Adrian. Then she spoke quietly. Good morning. Adrian studied her carefully. For the first time in years, the quiet structure of his life felt slightly different. Less controlled, less predictable. And somewhere in the city of Ravenna, men who worked for Victor Salazar were beginning to ask questions. Because word had already reached them. The barefoot girl from the street was now living inside Adrian Volkov's house. Sophia stood quietly in the doorway of Adrian Volkov's office. Morning light slipped through the tall windows behind him, casting long, pale lines across the wooden floor. The office itself felt enormous to her, dark bookshelves, heavy furniture, and walls decorated with maps and framed documents she couldn't understand. Adrian sat behind the desk, calm and still. Beside him, Victor watched the girl with careful curiosity. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Adrian nodded once. Good morning, Sophia. His voice was quiet but steady. Sophia stepped inside slowly, her small shoes making soft sounds against the floor. Good morning. She looked around the room, taking in every detail. Everything inside the house still felt unreal to her. The warmth, the quiet, the sense that no one here was rushing her away. Adrian gestured toward a chair near the desk. "You can sit." Sophia climbed onto the chair carefully, her feet once again dangling above the floor. Victor studied her for a moment before speaking. "Did you sleep well?" She nodded. "Yes." The answer came quickly, almost shyly. Adrian leaned back slightly in his chair. "What would you normally be doing right now?" he asked. Sophia tilted her head, thinking. "Looking for breakfast." Victor glanced briefly toward Adrian, but Adrian's face remained unreadable. "And where would you look?" Adrian asked. "Sometimes the bakery near the bus station throws away bread in the morning." The words were simple, spoken without complaint. "Just fact." Adrian folded his hands together on the desk. "And before that, before the streets." Sophia looked down at her shoes. For a moment she didn't answer. Then she spoke softly. "My mom and I lived in a small apartment." "What did she do for work?" "She cleaned offices at night." Adrian exchanged a brief glance with Victor. "Salazar Logistics." The name returned quietly into the room. Sophia continued. "She said the night shift paid more." "Did she like her job?" Adrian asked. Sophia shook her head slowly. "She said it was just temporary." The girl's fingers traced the edge of the chair as she spoke, as if touching something helped her remember. "Sometimes she came home very tired," Sophia said, "but one night she came home scared." Adrian's voice stayed calm. "What happened that night?" Sophia hesitated. Her memory seemed to search carefully through something fragile. "She told me she saw something she wasn't supposed to see." Victor leaned slightly forward. "Did she say what it was?" Sophia shook her head again. "No, she said if anyone asked questions, I should say nothing." The room fell silent. Adrian's eyes darkened slightly as he absorbed the information. "And after that," he asked gently, "she stopped going to work." Sophia's voice had grown quieter now. "She said we might have to move to another city." "Did you?" "No." "Why not?" The girl looked down again. 2 days later she died." The words seemed to hang in the air. Even Victor didn't speak for a moment. Adrian's expression remained controlled, but inside his mind, several pieces were already beginning to connect. A frightened worker, a powerful company, and a sudden death. He had seen this pattern before. Many times. Sophia continued softly. "The police said it was an accident." "But you don't think it was," Adrian said. Sophia shook her head slowly. "My mom was careful." The simple certainty in her voice carried more weight than any official report. Adrian stood from his chair and walked slowly toward the window. Outside, the courtyard remained quiet under the pale morning light. Security guards moved calmly near the gate. The world outside looked peaceful. But Adrian knew better. He turned back toward the desk. "After your mother died," he asked, "what happened to the apartment?" "The landlord said I had to leave." "Did anyone help you?" "No." The word came quickly. Adrian looked at Victor again. Neither man needed to say what they were thinking. This girl had been invisible to the entire system. Ignored. Discarded. Left alone. Sophia suddenly reached into the pocket of her dress. She pulled out a small notebook. The edges were worn, and the cover had faded from age. "My mom gave me this," she said. Adrian returned to the desk. "What is it?" Sophia opened the notebook carefully. Inside were drawings. Simple pictures made with colored pencils. Small houses. Some were big, some were tiny, Some had gardens, others had tall windows. Above each drawing, the same word appeared. Home. Sophia turned the pages slowly. My mom said someday we would have one. Adrian studied the pictures quietly. Children often drew things they dreamed about. But these drawings felt different. Each house was detailed, thoughtful, carefully imagined. Finally, Sophia closed the notebook and looked up at him. I tried asking other people for help. Her voice had become small again. But no one listened. Adrian leaned forward slightly. So you came to the restaurant? Sophia nodded. You looked like someone who could change things. The room grew quiet again, because Sophia had said it with complete sincerity. No fear. No manipulation. Just belief. Adrian looked down at the notebook, still resting on the desk. Then he looked back at Sophia. Something about the moment stirred an old memory deep inside him. Another small voice. Another child who had once believed someone strong would protect them. His sister. Adrian straightened slowly. We'll look into what happened to your mother, he said calmly. Sophia blinked. You will? Yes. The promise was simple. But in Adrian Volkov's world, promises carried weight. Across the city, in a tall office overlooking Ravenna's harbor, another man was already receiving new information. Victor Salazar sat behind his desk, reading a short report handed to him moments earlier. His expression hardened. The girl is alive, he asked. Yes, one of his men replied. And she's where? The man hesitated slightly, then answered. She was taken into Adrian Volkov's residence last night. The room fell silent. Salazar leaned back slowly in his chair. Of all the places the girl could have gone, she had chosen the worst possible one. Because Adrian Volkov was not a man easily controlled. And if he began asking questions, some very dangerous secrets might finally be discovered. The harbor of Ravenna woke early. Even before the sun fully rose, the docks were already alive with movement. Cargo cranes creaked slowly as they lifted heavy containers from ships that had arrived during the night. Workers moved across the concrete platforms in thick jackets, their voices carrying across the water while the cold morning wind rolled in from the sea. To most people, the harbor looked like any other busy shipping port. But beneath the organized chaos of crates and containers, another world existed. A quieter one. A more dangerous one. Inside a glass office overlooking the docks, Victor Salazar stood near the window, watching the morning operations below. His suit was perfectly tailored, his silver watch catching the pale light that filtered through the clouds. To the outside world, Victor Salazar was a respected businessman. His shipping company controlled half the cargo traffic entering Ravenna. But the cargo that appeared on official records was only part of the truth. Behind him, two men stood silently, waiting. Salazar continued looking out at the harbor. The girl is still alive, he said calmly. Neither man responded immediately. Salazar finally turned. And not only alive, he continued, but now inside Adrian Volkov's house. The words seemed to make the room colder. One of the men shifted slightly. We didn't expect her to survive this long. Salazar's expression hardened. That's not the problem. He walked slowly toward his desk. The problem is where she went. The man understood. Adrian Volkov was not someone easily manipulated. And if Volkov began investigating Sophia's past, certain things buried in Salazar's operations might rise to the surface. Salazar leaned against the desk. What do we know about the mother? The second man answered. She worked night cleaning at one of our logistics offices. Salazar nodded slowly. I remember. His eyes narrowed slightly. She saw something she shouldn't have. Security handled it. Yes, Salazar said quietly, but apparently not completely. He tapped his fingers once against the desk. Did the girl ever see anything? We don't know. Salazar's gaze darkened. That uncertainty is exactly the problem. Meanwhile, across the city, the atmosphere inside Adrian Volkov's residence remained calm. But calm did not mean idle. Adrian stood inside a smaller meeting room near his office, reviewing documents spread across a table. Victor stood beside him. These are the police reports connected to Sophia's mother, Victor said. Adrian scanned the pages carefully. The report described a late-night accident, a woman struck by a car while crossing the street. No witnesses, no suspects. Case closed. Adrian placed the report down. Too clean, he said. Victor nodded. Exactly. Adrian leaned against the table. What about the company? Victor opened another folder. Salazar Logistics operates several office buildings. One of them matches the address Sophia mentioned. And the night shift. The cleaning staff worked alone after midnight. Adrian's eyes narrowed slightly. Perfect condition for something to happen without witnesses. And the security cameras. Reportedly malfunctioning that night. Adrian almost smiled. Convenient. Victor folded his arms. If Salazar was involved, proving it won't be simple. Adrian looked down at the documents again. I'm not interested in simple. Across the hallway, Sophia sat at the kitchen table eating breakfast. A housekeeper had placed a plate of warm pancakes in front of her, along with a glass of orange juice. Sophia ate slowly, still amazed by the idea that food could simply appear without searching for it. One of the staff members watched her kindly. Do you like them? Sophia nodded with her mouth full. Yes. The woman smiled. You'll have to tell the chef that later. Sophia thought about that for a moment. Then she looked toward the hallway. Mr. Volkov said he would find out what happened to my mom. I'm sure he will. Sophia didn't fully understand the world Adrian lived in. But she had already learned something about him. When he said something calmly, people seemed to take it very seriously. Back in the meeting room, Adrian closed the final folder. Salazar won't like us looking into this, Victor said. That's not new. Victor studied him carefully. This could escalate. Adrian walked toward the window. Outside, the city stretched wide and bright under the morning sun. He had spent years maintaining a delicate balance in Ravenna. Every powerful figure knew their place. But investigating Salazar would disturb that balance. Adrian spoke quietly. If Sophia's mother died because she discovered something, someone needs to answer for it. Victor nodded slowly. I'll begin asking questions. Adrian turned back toward the table. And Victor? Yes. Quietly. Of course. But even as Victor left the room to begin the investigation, the situation was already moving faster than either of them realized. Because at that same moment, inside Salazar's office, another decision was being made. Salazar stood beside the window again. The harbor stretched wide below him, cranes moving slowly across the skyline. The girl can't remain under Volkov's protection, he said. One of his men stepped forward cautiously. What do you want us to do? Salazar turned toward them. His voice was calm. Cold. Find out what she knows. And if she knows too much. Salazar didn't hesitate. Then she becomes a problem that must disappear. The men nodded and left the office. Salazar returned his attention to the harbor. For years, he had built an empire that operated quietly beneath the surface of Ravenna. One small mistake, one curious child, could threaten everything. And somewhere across the city, inside a quiet mansion, Sophia Reyes sat safely eating breakfast, completely unaware that powerful men were already deciding her fate. The afternoon sunlight stretched across Adrian Volkov's office, long golden beams falling over the wooden floor and the large desk where he sat reviewing a growing pile of documents. Outside the window, the city of Ravenna moved with its usual rhythm. Cars filled the streets. Boats crossed the harbor. People hurried through their lives unaware that quiet investigations had already begun beneath the surface. Inside the room, the air felt heavier. Victor stood near the desk, placing another file in front of Adrian. "This one came from an old labor complaint," Victor said. Adrian opened it. The report was several years old, buried deep inside city records. Most people would never have found it. But Adrian had resources most people didn't. He scanned the page slowly. A worker from Salazar Logistics had filed a complaint about suspicious nighttime activity at one of the shipping warehouses. The complaint had been dismissed within days. Adrian leaned back slightly. Dismissed without investigation. Victor nodded. Pressure from the company's legal department. Adrian closed the file. How many workers have disappeared from Salazar's operations? Victor walked toward the window. At least 6 over the last 4 years. Police reports, all labeled as unrelated incidents. Adrian's expression remained calm, but something colder settled behind his eyes. Patterns like this rarely happen by accident. Across the room, a second folder lay open. Inside were photographs of the office building where Sophia's mother had worked. Adrian studied them quietly. "Night cleaning staff," he said. "Yes." "Alone in the building after midnight." "Correct." Perfect conditions for something illegal to happen unnoticed. Victor turned slightly. "You're thinking trafficking." Adrian didn't answer right away. Instead, he picked up one of the photographs. A loading dock behind the office building, hidden from the main street. He placed the photo back down. "I'm thinking Salazar has something to hide." A soft knock interrupted them. The door opened slowly. Sophia stood there. She looked smaller than usual against the tall wooden frame. "Am I interrupting?" Adrian's voice softened slightly. "No." She stepped inside cautiously. Behind her, one of the house staff members carried a small tray with tea and pastries. Sophia had insisted on bringing it herself. "I thought you might be hungry," she said. Victor raised an eyebrow slightly. Adrian looked at the tray, then back at Sophia. "You didn't have to do that." She shrugged a little. "My mom always said bringing food makes people less angry." For a moment, the seriousness of the room softened. Victor actually smiled faintly. Sophia placed the tray on the desk. As she did, her eyes drifted toward the papers scattered across the table. Photographs. Reports. Maps. "What are those?" she asked. Adrian followed her gaze. "Information about the place your mother worked." Sophia grew very still. "You're looking into it?" "Yes." Her small fingers gripped the edge of the desk. "My mom was scared that night." Adrian looked at her carefully. "What do you remember?" Sophia hesitated. The memory seemed fragile. "She came home very late." "What time?" "After midnight." "And what did she say?" Sophia looked down at the floor as she tried to recall. "She said there were trucks in the loading area." "Drugs?" "Yes." "At night?" Sophia nodded. "She said they weren't supposed to be there." Adrian exchanged a quick glance with Victor. Salazar's shipping operations normally ran through the harbor, not office buildings. Did she say what was inside them? Adrian asked. Sophia shook her head. No, she just said the men unloading them looked nervous. Victor leaned against the table. And the next day she quit her job. Yes. Sophia's voice grew quieter. She told me we might have to move away. Adrian felt a familiar tension rise in his chest. Someone who had seen something dangerous. Someone who had tried to escape. He had seen that story many times. Too many. Sophia looked back up at him. Will you find out what happened? Adrian held her gaze for a moment. I will try. She nodded slowly. Then she picked up the empty tray. Okay. As she turned to leave, Adrian watched her carefully. Her small figure reminded him of another child from long ago. His sister. The memory arrived suddenly. A narrow apartment. 2 children sitting on the floor. His sister laughing as she colored pictures in a small notebook. Adrian closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, Victor was watching him. You're thinking about her again, Victor said quietly. Adrian didn't deny it. I promised her I would protect her. You were a child. That doesn't change the result. Silence filled the office. Finally, Adrian spoke again. Sometimes the past sends you another chance. Victor studied him carefully. You think Sophia is that chance? Adrian didn't answer. Instead, he picked up another photograph from the table. A cargo truck parked near Salazar's building. Something about the image felt wrong. A detail slightly out of place. He looked closer. Then his eyes narrowed. The license plate. It belonged to a transport company that had been shut down years earlier during a federal investigation. Adrian slowly placed the photo down. Well, Victor said, noticing the change in his expression. Did you find something? Adrian nodded once. Yes. Across the city, inside the upper floor of Salazar Logistics, another meeting was taking place. 2 men stood in front of Victor Salazar's desk. We've confirmed it, one of them said. Volkov's people have started asking questions. Salazar's expression darkened. How far have they gone? They've already accessed several old records. Salazar stood slowly. That was faster than I expected. He walked toward the window, staring down at the harbor below. One small girl had triggered a chain of events he had spent years preventing. Salazar turned back toward the men. We can't allow Volkov to continue digging. What do you want us to do? Salazar's voice remained calm, but his eyes had turned cold. Find the girl. The men exchanged a quick glance. She's inside Volkov's residence. Salazar nodded slowly. Yes. Which meant one thing. Taking her would not be easy. But if Sophia Reyes remained alive, the truth about what happened to her mother might soon reach the wrong ears. And that was something Victor Salazar could never allow. Night settled slowly over Ravenna. The city lights flickered on one by one, glowing across the skyline like scattered stars. Rain clouds from the previous night had cleared, leaving the streets damp and reflective under the neon signs and passing headlights. But while most of the city relaxed into evening, other movements had already begun. Quiet ones. Hidden ones. Inside a black SUV parked 2 blocks away from Adrian Volkov's residence, 3 men sat watching the tall iron gates. They had been there for nearly an hour. One of them lowered a pair of binoculars. That's definitely the place. The driver nodded. Volkov's house. The third man in the back seat checked his phone. Salazar's instructions had been clear. Find the girl, learn what she knows, and if necessary, make sure she never speaks again. The man looked back toward the mansion. Tall walls, security cameras, armed guards. This won't be easy. Meanwhile, inside the residence, the atmosphere felt calm, almost peaceful. Sophia sat cross-legged on the living room floor with her small notebook open in front of her. Colored pencils lay scattered around her as she carefully added details to a new drawing. Another house. This one had a garden and tall windows. Adrian stood across the room near the fireplace, speaking quietly with Victor. The license plate confirms it, Adrian said. The truck belonged to a company shut down for human trafficking. Victor's expression darkened. That connects Salazar much deeper than we thought. Adrian nodded. If Sophia's mother saw those trucks, she may have witnessed part of the operation. And Salazar eliminated her before she could speak. Adrian's voice remained calm. But he didn't know about the girl. Across the room, Sophia looked up. She couldn't hear every word the men were saying, but she could sense the tension. Mr. Volkov. Adrian turned toward her. Yes. Are you angry? The question caught him slightly off guard. No. You look like you are. Adrian walked slowly toward her. Sophia held up her notebook. I drew another house. He looked down at the picture. It was simple but thoughtful. The windows were wide. A small tree stood beside the front door. Do you like drawing houses? He asked. Sophia nodded. My mom said someday we'd have one. Adrian studied the drawing quietly. Then Sophia asked another question. Do bad people live in this city? Adrian's eyes shifted briefly toward Victor. Yes, he said calmly. Many. Sophia looked down at her drawing again. My mom was scared of someone. Adrian crouched slightly beside her. Do you remember who? She shook her head slowly. No, but she said they were powerful. The word hung in the air. Powerful. Across the room, Victor's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. Then his expression sharpened. He stepped closer to Adrian and lowered his voice. Our perimeter team just reported something. Adrian stood immediately. What? There's been a vehicle parked near the street corner for over an hour. Adrian's gaze turned cold. How many people? 3 confirmed. Adrian looked toward the large front windows of the house. Though the street outside looked quiet, he knew better than to trust appearances. Salazar moves quickly, Adrian said. Victor nodded. Faster than we expected. Adrian turned back toward Sophia. She watched the 2 men with quiet curiosity. What's happening? She asked. Adrian spoke gently. Some people outside are trying to learn about you. Her small shoulders stiffened. Bad people. Yes. Sophia clutched her notebook tightly. Will they come inside? Adrian's voice remained calm. No. Victor walked toward the door, already speaking into a small radio device. Lock down the outer gate. Across the courtyard, security guards immediately moved into position. The iron gates at the entrance slowly closed with a heavy metallic sound. Outside in the SUV, the men noticed immediately. The driver frowned. They know we're here. The man in the back seat grabbed his phone. Then we leave. No, the first man said. Salazar told us to observe first. But as they continued watching the mansion, something became clear. Adrian Volkov's security was already tightening. Inside the house, Adrian looked back toward Sophia. She sat very still now. Fear had returned to her eyes. Adrian knelt in front of her again, just like he had in the restaurant. You're safe here, he said. She nodded slowly, but she still whispered one question. Why do they want me? Adrian held her gaze. Because they're afraid of what your mother saw. Across the room, Victor returned. The men outside are leaving, he reported. Adrian nodded once. Of course they are. They realized they couldn't get closer. Adrian looked toward the window again. No, he said quietly. They were never planning to come tonight. Victor frowned. What do you mean? Adrian's voice grew colder. They were measuring our defenses. Victor understood immediately. Salazar's men had only been scouting, which meant something worse would come later. Across the room, Sophia hugged her notebook tightly. She didn't understand everything that was happening, but she understood one thing very clearly. The bad people her mother had feared had finally found her. And somewhere in the dark streets of Ravenna, the men inside the SUV were already reporting back to Victor Salazar. The girl is definitely inside Volkov's house, one of them said over the phone. Salazar listened quietly. Then he asked one simple question. How strong is the security? The man hesitated. Very strong. Salazar smiled slightly. Then we'll need a better plan. Because now the situation had changed. This was no longer about a missing child. It had become something far more dangerous. A silent war between two powerful men. And Sophia Reyes was standing directly in the middle of it. Ravenna looked peaceful at night. From above, the city was nothing but glowing lights and quiet streets stretching toward the dark harbor. Restaurants buzzed with laughter. Cars rolled through intersections. People walked home without realizing how close danger often moved beneath the surface of their city. But beneath that calm exterior, two powerful forces had begun to move. Inside Adrian Volkov's office, the lights were still on long after midnight. Victor stood beside the desk, studying several new reports that had arrived from Adrian's network during the evening. Men loyal to Adrian worked quietly throughout Ravenna, dock workers, security officers, business owners who owed him favors. Information flowed to him from every corner of the city. Tonight, the flow had become steady. Victor placed a document on the desk. We've confirmed the truck routes, he said. Adrian looked up. From Salazar Logistics. Yes. Victor pointed to a map spread across the table. 3 warehouses connected to his company are moving shipments late at night. Adrian studied the map carefully. These routes avoid the harbor checkpoints. Exactly. Which means they aren't carrying anything legal. Victor folded his arms. Our contacts also confirmed something else. Adrian looked up again. What? Several containers were transferred from those trucks to smaller transport vans. Where did the vans go? Victor tapped a location on the map. A private airfield outside the city. Adrian's eyes darkened slightly. Human trafficking routes often followed patterns like that. Quiet transport through the harbor, hidden warehouses, then rapid movement out of the city. Sophia's mother had likely stumbled onto part of that chain. And Salazar had made sure she never spoke about it. Across the room, Sophia sat quietly on the couch. She had been allowed to stay in Adrian's office that evening because she was afraid to sleep alone. Her notebook rested on her lap, though she hadn't drawn anything for a while. Instead, she watched the 2 men working. The tension in the room was impossible to miss. Mr. Volkov, she asked softly. Adrian turned toward her. Yes. Are those bad people? Adrian followed her gaze toward the map. Yes. Sophia looked down at her hands. My mom said bad people hide things. She was right. The girl sat quietly for a moment. Then she asked something that made Victor glance toward Adrian. "Are you going to stop them?" Adrian walked slowly toward the couch. "Yes." Sophia looked relieved, but her voice remained small. "Will they come here again?" Adrian crouched slightly so they were eye level. "They might try." Her fingers tightened around the notebook. "Will they hurt you?" Adrian's expression didn't change. "No." The certainty in his voice carried the weight of a promise. Across the room, Victor cleared his throat slightly. "There's another issue." Adrian stood and turned. "What is it?" "Salazar is already reacting." "How?" "Two of his warehouses shut down operations tonight." Adrian frowned slightly. "He's cleaning evidence." "Exactly." Victor tapped the map again. "He knows we're investigating." Adrian walked back toward the desk. "Good." Victor raised an eyebrow. "Good." "Yes." Adrian's voice remained calm. "Because it means he's nervous." Outside the mansion walls, Adrian's security team had doubled their patrols. 2 guards walked the courtyard perimeter, while another monitored the camera system inside a small security room near the entrance. The quiet estate looked calm from the outside, but anyone watching carefully would notice something. More guards than usual. More lights. More movement. Across the city, inside his harbor office, Victor Salazar was also studying a map. But his map looked different. Instead of shipping routes, it showed the location of Adrian Volkov's residence. Several men stood around the table. "Volkov has tightened his security," one of them reported. Salazar nodded slowly. "I expected that. Should we try again tonight?" Salazar shook his head. "No." The men waited for further instructions. Salazar leaned forward slightly. "Volkov is dangerous when attacked directly." "So what do we do?" Salazar's expression hardened. "We weaken him first." The room fell silent. "How?" another man asked. Salazar tapped several locations on the map. "His businesses. Casinos. Nightclubs. Shipping contacts. If Volkov becomes distracted protecting his empire," Salazar said quietly, "his attention will move away from the girl. And then—" Salazar's voice turned colder. "Then we take her." Back at the mansion, Adrian finished reviewing the last report. He closed the folder slowly. Victor watched him carefully. "This will turn into a war," Victor said. Adrian looked toward the window. The city lights glowed across Ravenna's skyline. "Yes," he said calmly. "Probably. Are you ready for that?" Adrian didn't answer immediately. Instead, his eyes drifted toward the couch. Sophia had fallen asleep. Her notebook had slipped slightly from her hands. The small drawing of a house still showed on the open page. Adrian picked up the notebook carefully. He studied the drawing for a moment. Then he closed it gently and placed it beside her. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "Some wars are worth fighting." Across the city, Victor Salazar stood at the window of his office, watching ships move slowly through the harbor. He had built his empire carefully over many years. Quiet deals, careful threats, hidden operations. One small girl would not destroy everything. Salazar turned back toward his men. "Begin phase 1 tomorrow," he said. The men nodded and left the room. Salazar remained alone by the window. Somewhere in Ravenna, Adrian Volkov was preparing for battle. But Salazar believed something Adrian didn't yet understand. In wars like this, innocent people often became the easiest targets. And Sophia Reyes was still the weakest piece on the board. The harbor was almost silent at midnight. Most of Ravenna's shipping operations had slowed to a crawl, leaving the vast docks empty except for distant cranes and the occasional rumble of cargo machinery. A cold wind rolled across the water, carrying the faint smell of salt and diesel through the abandoned warehouses. It was the kind of place where quiet meetings happened. Dangerous ones. A black sedan rolled slowly to a stop near the edge of Pier 17. The engine shut off. A moment later, Adrian Volkov stepped out. His dark coat moved slightly in the harbor wind as he looked across the empty docks. Several of his men stood nearby, positioned carefully in the shadows between containers. This meeting had been arranged only hours earlier, and Adrian already knew it would not end peacefully. Behind him, Victor stepped out of the car. "You're sure about this?" Victor asked quietly. Adrian's eyes remained fixed on the dark water ahead. "Yes." Across the pier, another set of headlights appeared. A long black SUV approached slowly, its tires crunching softly over gravel before stopping 30 meters away. The doors opened. Victor Salazar stepped out. He wore a long gray coat, his calm expression barely disturbed by the cold wind. Two bodyguards followed behind him, remaining several steps back as he approached the center of the pier. For a moment, the two powerful men simply looked at each other. Both understood exactly what this meeting meant. Salazar spoke first. "Adrian." Adrian's voice remained calm. "Victor." Salazar glanced briefly around the harbor. "You always liked dramatic locations." Adrian shrugged slightly. "You requested the meeting." "That's true." Salazar stopped a few feet away. Up close, the tension between them felt almost visible in the cold night air. "You've been asking questions about my company," Salazar said calmly. "Yes." "Why?" Adrian didn't hesitate. "A woman who worked for you died." Salazar's expression didn't change. "Accidents happen." Adrian's voice hardened slightly. "Not like that." The wind moved across the pier again, rattling a loose metal chain somewhere nearby. Salazar studied Adrian carefully. "This is about the girl." "Yes." Salazar sighed softly. "She means nothing." Adrian's eyes darkened. "She means everything to someone who was killed because of what she saw." Salazar smiled faintly. "You're assuming a lot." Adrian took a slow step forward. "Your trucks were operating outside your usual routes." "That proves nothing." "They were carrying containers linked to a trafficking investigation." Salazar's smile faded slightly. "And you think a cleaning woman discovered this grand conspiracy?" "I think she saw something that made you nervous." For a moment, the harbor felt completely silent. Then Salazar chuckled softly. "You've always had a talent for imagination." Adrian didn't move. "The girl stays under my protection." Salazar's voice turned colder. "You've started a conflict you don't need." "Maybe." "You have an empire to run, Adrian. And you have secrets to hide." Salazar's eyes sharpened. "Let me give you some advice." Adrian waited. "Walk away from this." The wind lifted the edge of Adrian's coat as he answered. "No." Salazar's patience finally thinned. "You're risking your entire organization for a child you met yesterday." Adrian's voice remained calm. "I've destroyed larger empires for less." Behind Salazar, one of the bodyguards shifted slightly. The tension between both groups of men tightened instantly. Salazar noticed. "Relax," he said without looking back. Then he turned his attention to Adrian again. "You're making this personal." "It already is." Salazar studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "So be it." He stepped back slightly. "You should go home tonight and think carefully about what happens next. Adrian didn't move. I already have. Salazar turned toward his vehicle. Before entering, he paused and spoke one final sentence. Empires fall when leaders forget where their weaknesses are. Then he got into the SUV. The vehicle pulled away slowly, disappearing into the darkness beyond the harbor. For several seconds, Adrian remained standing on the pier. The cold wind moved across the water. Victor stepped closer. That went about as expected. Adrian nodded slightly. Yes. You know what this means. War. Victor folded his arms. And Sofia will remain his primary target. Adrian turned toward the dark harbor. The meeting had confirmed everything. Salazar was afraid, which meant the truth about his operations was far worse than Adrian had suspected. Adrian spoke quietly. Increase security around the house. It's already doubled. Triple it. Victor nodded. Across the city, the mansion remained quiet. Sofia slept peacefully in her room, unaware of the meeting that had just taken place. She dreamed softly, her notebook resting beside the bed. The drawing of the house remained open on the last page. But far away at the harbor, Salazar's SUV moved quickly through the empty streets. Inside the vehicle, one of his men spoke carefully. Do you want us to prepare for the next phase? Salazar stared out the window. Yes. Volkov won't stop now. No, Salazar replied calmly. He won't. The man hesitated. What about the girl? Salazar's eyes turned cold. If we can't reach her. He paused briefly. Then we make sure Volkov loses something else. The SUV disappeared into the dark streets of Ravenna. And somewhere inside the quiet mansion across the city, Sofia Reyes slept peacefully for the last time before the war truly began. Morning came quietly to Ravenna. Soft sunlight spread slowly across the rooftops, touching the harbor cranes, the tall buildings, and the quiet streets still waking from the night. For most people in the city, it was another ordinary day. But for Adrian Volkov, the night had already changed everything. Inside his residence, the house felt unusually still. Security had been increased before dawn. Guards moved through the courtyard more frequently, their radios whispering with quiet updates. The war had begun, and Adrian intended to finish it. He stood in his office looking out at the city, his hands resting calmly behind his back. The skyline stretched far into the distance, glowing under the pale morning light. Behind him, Victor entered the room carrying several documents. It's done, Victor said. Adrian turned slightly. Salazar. Arrested at 5 this morning. Adrian nodded once. The events of the night had moved quickly after the harbor meeting. Adrian's investigation had uncovered enough evidence, shipping records, hidden cargo manifests, and testimony from frightened workers, that authorities could no longer ignore what had been buried inside Salazar Logistics. Several warehouses had been raided before sunrise. Trafficking victims had been discovered. Hidden transport containers had been opened. And Victor Salazar's empire had collapsed almost overnight. Victor placed the final report on the desk. The police are calling it one of the largest trafficking busts in the city's history. Adrian walked back toward the desk slowly. And Salazar. In custody. Adrian looked down at the report. For years, Salazar had operated quietly behind respectable business deals and powerful connections. Now that world was finished. Victor studied Adrian's expression. You should feel satisfied. Adrian's voice remained calm. I do. But there was something else in his tone. Something quieter. Across the hallway, Sofia sat at the kitchen table eating breakfast again. This time she wasn't alone. The house staff had grown comfortable with her presence. One of the women had braided Sophia's hair that morning, while another placed fresh fruit beside her plate. Sophia looked healthier already. Warmer. Safer. But she still held the small notebook beside her plate. The drawings of houses filled nearly every page. Adrian entered the kitchen quietly. Sophia looked up immediately. Good morning. Good morning. She studied his face carefully. Did you find out what happened to my mom? Adrian sat across from her. Yes. Sophia stopped eating. Her small fingers rested on the edge of the table. Was it bad people? Yes. She nodded slowly. My mom said they were powerful. They were. Sophia thought about that for a moment. Are they gone now? Adrian met her eyes. Yes. The simple answer seemed to settle something inside her. She looked down at her notebook again. My mom always said someday we'd have a house. Adrian picked up the notebook and opened it. Page after page showed careful drawings. Small homes. Big homes. Homes with gardens. Homes with bright windows. Each one labeled with the same word. Home. Adrian studied them quietly. Then he picked up a pencil lying beside the notebook. Sophia watched curiously as he turned to the final blank page. Slowly, carefully, Adrian began drawing. A simple house. Nothing extravagant. Just a quiet home with two figures standing in the doorway. Sophia leaned forward. Who are they? Adrian finished the drawing and set the pencil down. One is you. She smiled softly. And the other one? Adrian closed the notebook gently. Someone who decided to stay. Sophia looked at him carefully. Does that mean I can live here? Adrian nodded once. Yes. The word hung in the air like sunlight. Sophia's eyes widened slightly. For real. For real. For a moment she didn't say anything. Then she jumped from the chair and hugged him tightly. Adrian froze slightly, clearly unaccustomed to sudden affection. But after a moment, he gently placed one hand on her shoulder. Across the room, Victor stood quietly in the doorway watching. A small smile appeared on his face. For years, Adrian Volkov had ruled Ravenna through fear, power, and control. But something had changed. The house no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like something else. Something warmer. Later that evening, Adrian stood alone on the balcony outside his office. The city stretched endlessly beneath him, glowing under the fading light of sunset. For years, he had built an empire designed to control chaos. But tonight, something felt different. The weight he had carried for so long, the guilt of failing his sister, felt lighter. Behind him, small footsteps approached. Sophia stepped onto the balcony. She held the notebook in her hands. I finished another drawing, she said. Adrian looked down at the page. This house was larger than the others. Brighter. Full of windows. And this time, 3 figures stood outside. Sophia looked up at him. I think this one is better. Adrian studied the drawing quietly. For the first time in many years, something unfamiliar settled in his chest. Peace. Because sometimes redemption arrived in unexpected ways. Sometimes it walked barefoot through the door of a quiet restaurant. And sometimes it simply asked for a home,